Okay, I'm not sure how well this is all going to work out. This was actually the very first video I had ever shot, and also the very first video I'd ever tried to edit. During editing, something went wrong with the file and they got totally messed up, and I can't seem to get them fixed. So this project was actually completed, and the planer was reassembled and everything was put back together. So I've disassembled it all again, and I'm going to try and shoot some more video and then make things work out. So what we were doing here, this is a Mastercraft Wood Planer, and this is one of two feed rollers. There's a front feed roller and then the rear feed roller. And on the drive end of this, they use these metal blocks for bushings. I don't know what material it's made out of. They're not super hard steel, and I know that because of the way they wear. So this goes into the machine, and there's some clips here and stuff that fasten this in to hold the roller in place. And what's happened over time, on the drive end, there's always constant pull in one direction on this thing, and it's rounded out the bushing. I don't have the original bushing any longer to show you. I might be able to save a clip from the original video I did and get that in here. So I've researched online to try and buy this part. There's other brands of wood planers out there that have the same design to them, but the bushings are a different size and they won't fit into the casting in this machine. So I cannot find the actual Mastercraft replacement part. And that's unfortunate, because this machine has done a lot of work for me, and this is the only problem I've had with it. Everything else is still working good. The motor's working good. Everything else is fine with it. So what we're going to do today, a while back, just for the heck of it, not for any particular reason, I was melting pop cans down in a container in the open fire pit in the backyard, and I had an old muffin tin that the wife was throwing out, and I was just pouring the aluminum into the muffin spots in the tray, so I ended up with these aluminum muffins. So I'm going to make a new bushing myself. Now I'll try and again get a clip from my first time that hopefully will still work. I've already had this cut down into a square, and I had to drill a hole in the center. So that part I hope I can save from my first time round shooting video. And we ended up with an aluminum muffin. Now I've cut 3 sides off already. I got one left to do, and then we're gonna have to square it all up, because it's definitely not square cutting it with a hacksaw. When we're done that, we'll see if we can get a hole drilled perfectly center in this thing of the right diameter for the shaft on that roller, and reassemble our wood planer, and we'll see how it works out. Video, because it was a lot of work and I don't want to do that again. This was the end result, the bushing that I made out of one of these. So, and the issues, I did run into some problems. I needed a 5/8 hole for this shaft, and I thought I had a 5/8 drill bit. Turns out a 1/2 inch was the largest that I had. So I had already cut it to square, drilled a 1/2 inch hole, and the hole was off-centered. I did use a drill press, and the chuck wobbles around a little bit on the drill press, so that may have been why I didn't have it right on center, or it was just me. So I used a Dremel tool with a bit on the end of it to carve that out to 5/8, and in doing so I was able to carve more out of the side where I was off center and actually get the hole back into the center position. If I had to do this again, I would probably drill the hole first and then worry about cutting it square with an equal distance from the hole to the outside all the way around. It would be easier to work from the outside than it was to try and get that hole right in the center. But we did get it done. Did take quite a bit of work. So the good thing about having to shoot this video again, when I did this the first time, I didn't know how long this would last, because this is much softer than the original one, whatever material that's made from. So I wasn't sure how long this would last. But as I said, I had already done this and had it reassembled. And when I reassembled it, I swapped ends on these so that the one I made that's softer was not on the drive end where it's constantly getting that pressure pulling on it from the chain drive system. I put it on the other end. I also put it on the other end because to keep an eye on it, when all these sprockets, gears, and the guards are on those, you can't see this bushing. From the other end of the machine, I can see it. So I put it back together, been using it. Every once in a while I put a drop of oil in between the shaft and the edge of the bushing inside, just to help it because I know it's softer material. And it's held up very well. Since I did that, I've probably got 30 hours worth of use planing lumber on this thing. And I think it might be starting to wear just a little bit. You probably can't see the little bit of movement that's in there, but I didn't have any movement at all when I first made it. So it has wore just a little bit. Now the one that was on this end was this one, and I had switched it to the other end to the drive end. And it's already starting to show signs of wear. It actually has more movement in it now than what the one that I made does. So the one that comes with the machine, again on the drive end, it's already starting to show signs of wear in that. No, I'm not going to say the same 30 hours of use because it probably was already started to wear before that, before I moved it to that end, but it is definitely wore more now. But the planer still seems to be working. It is still feeding the wood through it okay. So I'm going to put it back together and continue to use it. Now when I was starting all of this, I didn't really have a choice at the time when I was starting it. By the time I got it done, it was Christmas actually, and I did not know that I was getting a new one of these for Christmas. So even though I don't need this one any longer, the parts are here. I'm going to put it together. I do a lot of planing on reclaimed wood or skid wood, and I always try and get all the metal out of it. Once in a while you might miss one, and a nail or even a staple puts nicks in these blades very easily. So I'm going to continue to use this as the initial planer when I'm doing reclaimed wood, and then when I get to the final planing process where I want that nice smooth finish, no ridges in the wood from chips that I've got in the blade in this one, then I'll get the new planer out, do my final pass in the new one. The new one's going to last me a lot longer doing that. And if this one, completely blows up on me or something, it gets finished. I can save whatever parts are still viable and use those parts for the new one, because as I said, it's the exact same machine, same model, same design, everything. So we'll start putting this thing together. Now, first thing, let me turn this camera a bit. Okay, I got the camera swung around there, so hopefully I've got it in the right spot so you can see. Before you start working in here, inside the planer, it's a belt drive. The motor is a belt drive to the center drum. The center drum has two cutting heads on it. On the opposite end of where this is the drive motor and the belt here on this end. On the other end is where the sprockets and the chains go that drive the two feed rollers from the turning of this main drum. So all I wanted to point out in here was to turn this. There's one of the cutting blades across there and the other one across here. So you can turn that by hand, get those blades tucked away inside the machine, so if your hands slip in here at all, you're not cutting yourself open on those blades, because they are very sharp. So the rollers, and that's the chain end where it's getting all the pull from that wears. So I'm going to put the original manufacturer's one there because it's heavier than the one I made. They're spring loaded, so we'll pop the springs in the holes first. They're not a perfectly square bearing. One side, it's you see them up and down movement there, it's very sloppy. So you have to get it turned the right way. It should be a very snug fit sliding in. So there's that spring pressure that's on it. You can see it coming back out there. Now they don't use very big clips or screws on this at all to hold it in place. These little clips here, they just have that kind of a circle where the screw goes through the hole, and that edge of the circle overlaps on the bushing, and when you tighten the screws up, that's what pulls it into place and holds it there. So it's not much, and the screws they give you are no longer than they absolutely have to be, so it can be a bit of an issue holding that roller in, because you got to squeeze in the tension of that spring to get those screws started. And those ones started good on that end. And on the other end, I actually added a couple of small washers, because those tabs, I don't know if they got bent or not, but they're not holding that block in as well as I'd like them to. So the washer just gives me the same idea, a little bit more overlap to hold that bushing in. Now this end's usually harder, the second end. Well, maybe we're going to get lucky. So the pressure on it pushing outward usually makes it a little bit harder to get that started. Okay, not bad. I have had to struggle more than that with those before. It's a 4mm Allen wrench for these, and I don't tighten one up completely. I try and draw it in evenly. And there's one more thing to check before you do the final tightening of these. There is a little bit of room to be able to move that bushing block in this direction, and I want to make sure, see, that roller has no movement in this direction at all. It's rubbing up tight against both of those blocks, and I don't want it to, because when it's spinning, it's going to generate more heat and may start to wear into the blocks from the end of the roller itself. So I'm just going to tap the blocks back just ever so slightly. If I can find something to get in there with, I'll get a flat screwdriver. Oh, maybe too far. So you can see now that roller, hopefully you can see it, it moves back and forth, actually a little more than I want to. So I'll push this one back in just a bit. Good enough. So that little bit of play sideways isn't going to make any difference, because all the work this thing's doing, when you bring this head down for the thickness of your wood, it's applying pressure on that wood just to feed it through. So a little bit of movement sideways is not going to affect how it pushes wood through the machine at all. So that's what we want. We don't want it jammed in there tight. So now we can go ahead and finish tightening these up. They need to be fairly tight so the vibration doesn't bring these things loose. They had tiny little lock washers on them originally. They were just cheap. They flattened out. First time I took it apart, they never sprung back the way a lock washer should. So I've been putting it together without lock washers. It's been staying together. I don't want to try and crank them too much, because as I said, there's only a very few threads on them, and they're not going to be a hardened steel bolt or anything, so you could strip them. So that's how that goes together. I don't know if you can see where it looks like little burn marks on the blade. That's actually where there's a chip in the blade. So it's generating more heat when the wood's going through, because it's a dull spot, so it's not cutting as good as it should be. This one's got a couple of very big gouges in it, and these are just from Staples. I've never hit a nail with this thing. There's just tiny little paper staples that are sometimes in the wood that I miss seeing it and pulling it out. And that's the damage it can do just from a tiny staple. I mean, if you hit a nail, I'm sure it would just destroy the blade completely. Maybe I can flip this up and you can see. I'll have to move the camera again. So what we're looking at here, the motor drives from both ends actually. So it has a belt drive on the other end that turns the center drum with the cutting heads on it. And this shaft right here coming out of the motor has sprockets and chains in here that drives these two feed rollers. Now I got to remember the right order of these because they have different size spacers. I think this was the way we put it together. We'll try that. I'm missing something. I got an extra sprocket. Oh, wait a minute. We got something wrong. No, we don't. Okay. So you can see there was a sleeve here on this one, and it is twice the length of the sleeve on the other one. So that one goes on there, that one goes on there. That sprocket should be in line with this sprocket to accept one of the chains. I know my hands are probably in the way, you can't see exactly what I'm doing. I'm putting the sprocket in the chain because you can't stretch the chain over the sprockets. So that keeps that in line. Then there's another small spacer that goes on here. And the last sprocket, and we'll just tap that down to make sure it's on all the way. And that will let the chain line up with the sprocket on the other shaft. And you may have to turn it around a little bit because it's got two flat sides on it. So it only fits on the shaft one way. Like so. One of the things you might want to do if you have one of these, there's a plastic cover that covers this area up, and I recommend removing it and leave it off because I found, you probably can't see it, there's a spot right there. Yeah, you can't see it from there. I'm going to move the camera again. What I wanted to show you here was this spot right down there. You can see where it's real shiny right there on the end of that Allen key. That was the first indication I ever had that there was an issue with this. So as I said, there's a plastic cover that covers all of this up. And what was happening, I was feeding wood through it one day and there was a loud bang actually. And I didn't know what it was, and I kept running it. It just did it the one time, and then every once in a while it would make this bang. And I couldn't see any pieces of wood jammed anywheres in that cutting head, you know, where I showed you that piece of metal that was bent. I shut it off, kind of looked inside here. I didn't see any pieces of wood jammed in it anywheres. I didn't know what it was. So again, I kept running it, and every once in a while I would get this banging noise. So I finally tore it apart for the first time one day, and I found that this chain was eating into the housing here. It was rubbing up against that, and that's when I first discovered the bushing had wore out in this end, and it let this roller move inward from the pull on that chain to the point where the chain was carving through that housing, and the chain would get caught and then release, and that was where I was getting the banging noise from, was when it was catching and releasing going over this spot. So once I discovered that, that's when I realized what was going on with this whole bushing scenario in here. And I initially just switched it with the good one on the opposite end, put it back together. That moved the chain away from the housing, and I continued to run it for a little while. But the roller was on an angle because the bushing was now wore on the opposite end. So it was no longer feeding wood properly and stuff, and I had to always be assisting it with getting the wood through, because if it was a narrow piece of wood, it wanted to turn because the pressure was uneven on that roller. So that was why we had to do this in the first place, was to fix all that up. So if you've got one of these and you've heard it banging, there's your issue. The bushing is the reason why. And when I took that cover off that first time, the very, very fine dust was built up so bad in here. I'm surprised it didn't just generate enough heat to actually start the dust on fire in here. It was just that thick. So after that, I never put the cover back on. There is a side guard that goes on this whole side, but this is exposed from underneath. So if you've got an air compressor or anything, you know, it's easy to just keep that dust blowing out of there. And I never had that issue again, as long as I could keep that clean. So hopefully if you've got one of these, you were able to learn something. The only thing I have left to do, there's these tables and extension rollers. So these tables fold down, and then there's extension rollers on the end that come out to give you more area for your wood coming through. So I had to remove the one on that side just to make it easier for you to see what I was doing down in here when I was working on it. So I just need to put that back on and put this on its stand and bolt it down on its stand, and it's ready to put back in service. So once again, thank you very much for watching.